Hey everyone, and welcome to Permissionless Learning. This is the community driven podcast where we have real discussions with real people, and it's especially student focused because a lot of students join and they get to learn from people who are at a senior position in a field, and they get real advice about how they can get started in their journey, or if there are any learnings that they can have from other people's journeys. So today we have Jason Mays, who is the senior developer advocate at Google, who advocates for TensorFlow.JS, which is the machine learning library for JavaScript. And yeah, today he's gonna talk about his journey and the opportunities that people have in both, uh, I guess, developer advocacy and also TensorFlow.js. When I sent out the request for questions, got a lot of questions about both. But yeah, I guess I'll let Jason talk now. So, Jason, why don't you introduce yourself to us and talk a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Jason Mays. I'm currently the developer advocate or developer relations engineer for TensorFlow.JS here at Google. And I got to this role through many different roles in my career, actually. So I've been on quite an interesting journey to get to my current position, having held roles in web engineering, creative engineering or creative technology, and then finally developer advocacy. And I've worked in various types of startups, and also, of course, Google for 10 plus years now as well. So I've managed to get a good perspective on different sizes of companies and the pros and cons of all of those kinds of things. So happy to take questions on those things as well.
All right, all right. So, if you could talk about how you landed up at Google, I guess like how you started and
Sure.
what did you, yeah.
So this is essentially my kind of life story in 2 minutes, if you will. So I back in the good old days, I studied computer science at the University of Bristol over in England. And it was here I kind of discovered that I really enjoyed combining both my creative side of my mind and also the technical. And that's where I found my passion for web engineering, essentially in JavaScript, because I could also do things on the back end, but then have a front end that was just as meaningful and just as much thought had gone into that as well. So once I graduated, I actually joined an investment bank for one day as an engineer, and then I quit that and moved on to a startup called Exmos. And essentially, I left that previous role because the company culture was not for me. So one advice there I say from the beginning is when you want to work for a company, make sure the company culture is a good fit for you and your personality as well, and don't be afraid to move on to other things if it's not. So I then joined a startup called Exmos, which was a semiconductor company. I looked after all of their web engineering and took them from a very small startup. I was their 15th employee, 15. And by the time I'd left, they're a global company, which is cool. And I got to wear many hats there, actually, such as obviously the web engineering, but also design, UX, photography, 3D modeling, digital marketing, all that kind of stuff that you need to do at a startup to make sure it's successful and grows over those years. Now, after that, I spawned my own company. I was a director of my own company for a year in parallel with that semiconductor job. And just as I was about to kind of do that full time, essentially, Google contacted me asking me to join them at an innovation role within web engineering at Google in the London office. And I figured, well, I'll just try the interviews and see what happens. I didn't actually expect to get the job, but I figured it'd be good interview practice at the very least. And I kept getting through the different rounds. And of course, I then was offered a job as a web engineer at Google for a team called Innovation Services. And essentially that team was making scaled web applications and web components using HTML5 and even ActionScript back in the day, back when we had Flash and things like that, to do innovative things for in the world of advertising. So you can imagine using kind of computer vision to recognize an object to do some interesting thing in a ad unit or something like that. So we'll make these kind of sophisticated components that people could then reuse with ease. Now, that was all good. That was typical web engineering kind of stuff. But I realized at Google, we've got this 20% time where you can spend one day a week to explore other ideas and interests. And I encourage all companies to allow their employees to do such things because some of Google's best products started as 20% projects, in fact, and a lot of good can come from that. But
Right.
in my 20% time, I actually kind of worked with a team in America called the Zoo. That's his internal name. And essentially, it's a creative think tank at Google. And they wanted someone who could cover both sides of the technical and creative world, which is where I kind of actually enjoyed these things. But instead of working on existing web applications and components, it was starting with a blank canvas to tell the stories of our largest customers globally. So I can't say all the brands, but you can imagine big brand names. I've probably worked with them, and I've had to use emerging technologies, including web technologies, but also other things as well, like virtual reality, augmented reality, machine learning, and all this kind of stuff to make world firsts that could tell their stories in a novel way. And that's where I found machine learning, essentially. And I realized very early on that back in 2016, this was really going somewhere when TensorFlow was released, and I really wanted to get into that more. But it was not until a few years after that this opportunity came up to be developer advocate for TensorFlow.JS, which allowed me to combine my passions for web engineering. And at that point, I've been doing it for about 15 years using JavaScript, and then also allowing me to learn more about the machine learning world as well. So that's basically my story of how I got to my current position.
All right. All right. Wow, that was very in-depth and useful. So, I guess right before you got offered the team, I mean the position for being a senior dev advocate, I guess you were using things like machine learning and VR to build creative experiences around your around showcasing your client's work, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my previous role was very exciting as a creative technologist or creative engineer, we called ourselves, because if you search creative technologist online, there's two types of creative technologists. There's ones that are just futurists. They kind of know what is possible, but they're not really engineers. And then there's the ones that can actually use the technology they're talking about and actually make prototypes. So I fell into the latter category there. And at Google, you're expected to actually do the engineering as well, not just think about the future, but actually make the future as well. So in that situation, I was able to explore many different technologies, and that was probably the hardest part of the role, was to keep up with everything in the world, so what existed, so that you could leverage it and hack it together with something else to make something new. I mean, if you just take machine learning on its own, that's a full-time job just to keep up with the advances in machine learning these days. And it's very hard to have a high-level knowledge of everything, but deep enough that it's useful, right? So that's the most challenging part of that role. But that's, of course, where I found machine learning, and it led me to my current position.
I see. I see. And I guess in your current position, you combine your passions for creative technologies along with, I guess, the work you were already doing promoting them, but now on a full-time scale.
Yeah, so I
So,
think I definitely
uh,
leveraged the learnings I had from my previous role in my role as developer advocate. Obviously, as an advocate for TensorFlow.js, I focus purely on that product. But of course, in order to do that, sometimes I need to make interesting prototypes to inspire people to take their first steps of machine learning. And of course, my background as a creative engineer allows me to kind of create innovative prototypes that hopefully capture people's imaginations. I think some of you may have seen my Twitter example that's pinned on my Twitter right now, which is like an
yeah,
invisibility prototype, for example, and that did the rounds across the world and got a lot of people interested in machine learning as how did he actually pull that off? And it makes people ask questions. And he did it in JavaScript. How did he do that in JavaScript? And of course, it creates a conversation from that. Yeah.
right, right. I know what the general responsibilities for developer advocates are creating events, connecting with members of the community, creating demos which attract attention. But if you could just give a brief description. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not possible to talk about an average day, I guess, because you do a lot of things, but
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, typically, so developer advocacy is all about ensuring that the product that you represent is easy to use, and if it's not, you need to fix things so it is. So you work very closely with the engineering team that actually create the product. So on my team, we've got a whole bunch of amazing software engineers who actually write the library itself, and then I'll often take their the work that they're about to release and make sure I understand how to use it. And if I don't understand, then it means, of course, our community is not going to understand either. So I'll produce tutorials, I'll produce presentations, maybe I'll make prototypes. So it's a mixture of all these kinds of duties mashed into one role. So you can think of it as a software engineer who enjoys talking to people as the kind of short title for this kind of a role. And often in non-COVID times can often involve travel as well to various countries to deliver such presentations at events like Google I/O or whatever it might be, or the larger events that the company might be represented at. So
Right,
yeah, so
right.
essentially I represent the product team to the developers in the real world, and I represent the real world developers to the product team, so that they can understand the pain points that they're going through to make the product better. So it's kind of a two-way process there. Yeah.
Right, right. And an interesting point you brought up is that if, I mean, sometimes some things can be too complex for the general public, so you create tutorials and demos around that. So how do you figure out whether something's too complex? Because generally, as developers, we generally have a privilege that, we know a
Yes.
lot of things already.
Yeah, and that's very true,
So,
actually. And the more experience you get at a role, the more bias you have in your mind of, well, doesn't everyone know that? Because if you use it day
yeah,
in, day out, you can just assume that this is knowledge that everyone knows. And I think, as a developer advocate, you got to remind yourself to kind of go back to your roots and remember what it was like when you were just starting out in the world of machine learning or web engineering or whatever it might be, and think of it from that perspective. And often if I find that I'm unsure about something, if it's not immediately obvious that I might be like not simplifying something enough, I'll find people from people in the community, and I'll ask them to like just test this tutorial out with Code Lab or something like this, and we'll get feedback from these people. So before I launch anything like a Code Lab, I always get other people to try it out and give me feedback as to what worked for them, what they found difficult or confusing. And after you've done a few iterations of that, you can usually get to a good point quite fast and have some level of confidence that it will go down well with the intended audience.
right, right. That makes sense. And another thing I wanted to ask you is that if you were to give advice to the listeners or students who are listening in right now
Yeah.
about how they can, I guess, form their own path in life, I guess, what advice would you give?
Yes. So if I were to rewind my life and go back in time, if I was talking to my younger 20-something-year-old self, I think definitely take more risks when you're younger. So I would join startups and things when you're younger, and these are very good to gain experience as well. You get to try a lot of different areas out before you start specializing. Because once you specialize at a large company like Google, you typically, are responsible for a very narrow set of things. Like right now, I represent TensorFlow.JS, and that's my kind of thing that I own. Whereas in a startup, you will have the ability to kind of be more flexible in the things that you're covering and all that kind of stuff. So I think when you're younger, it's a good opportunity to explore the world a little more and see what's out there and what's possible, all these different kinds of job roles. A lot of people graduate and think it's just software engineering, and it's not just software engineering. There's lots of other complementary jobs that can use your coding skills, but also combine it with things like marketing or presenting or whatever it might be that you're interested in. Or in the case of creative technologists, you can actually use other technologies as well from other industries and make great prototypes for your clients and things there too. So startups allow you to kind of get all those skills and try it all out before you kind of settle down and go higher up the ladder, so to speak.
Right, right. Yeah, I guess your journey followed a similar path where I mean, I guess for the new people who joined, so Jason worked at a bank for a
One day.
day before realizing,
Yeah.
yeah, before realizing it wasn't for him and moved on to a startup and worked at one or two startups before finally getting an offer from
Yeah.
Google for working as a creative technologist. Uh, so yeah, I think that's pretty much it about what I wanted to learn about you from your life, and I
Mhm.
think the audience
Sure.
might have a few questions as well. But before that, since you are the developer advocate for TensorFlow.JS, I think you might also like to talk about that a little.
Sure, yes. I mean, if there's any people here who are JavaScript developers or engineers or curious about machine learning, even, so TensorFlow.js is essentially a machine learning library by Google. It's open source and it's designed for JavaScript. So you may associate TensorFlow with Python in the past, but our team has made the equivalent thing in JavaScript. And there's some benefits of doing it in JavaScript here, such as the ability to run offline. You can actually have lower latency inference because you're not sending the stuff to the server and waiting for the result to come back. You can have complete privacy because if you take the sensors from the webcam, none of that data is being sent to the server. So you can actually preserve the user's privacy and all that kind of stuff. So, there's many reasons why you might want to use things in a browser. And of course, if you can run stuff in the browser, you can share that with people in a much easier way instead of having to, you know, install Linux, install TensorFlow, install the CUDA drivers, install all these other things, clone the GitHub repository, read the README. That's a big barrier for people to start learning machine learning. Whereas if you just go to a website and it just works, that's a much more fun way to get started to test out models and that kind of thing. So yeah, if you're curious about machine learning and you're going to want some easy way to get started, do try TensorFlow.js. There's plenty of tutorials out there. If you just check my profile or DM me afterwards, I'm always happy to send you some links. But yeah, feel free to check us out.
All right. And just to get a little bit technical, is it a complete rewrite of TensorFlow in JavaScript, or is it more like a translation of the Python code into JS?
Great, a great question. So it actually depends on where you're running us, essentially. So we support Node.js on the back end, and of course JavaScript on the front end in the browser. If you're using Node.js, the Node.js is actually a wrapper around C++, which is the core TensorFlow black box, if you will, which is exactly the same thing that Python does. Python actually talks to the C++ behind the scenes as well. So Node.js is actually as fast or faster than Python due to the just-in-time compiler of JavaScript, and you'll see no performance differences on the back end. So in that sense, they're very similar, and you can even take Python-saved models and run them in Node.js, TensorFlow.js, without any conversion. So that's pretty cool. And then on the front end, in JavaScript in the browser, yes, our TensorFlow.js API in the browser is a complete rewrite. And it's not just one rewrite, it's actually several rewrites because we support
Okay.
different backends as well. And by backend, I don't mean server, I mean the hardware that you can execute on. So in TensorFlow.js in the browser, you can run in plain old JavaScript, which is the slowest form of execution. You can run in WebAssembly, which is faster execution on the CPU. And you can run in WebGL, which allows you to run on the GPU of any of the devices that are supporting it, which is, I think, currently 95, 96% of devices support WebGL. So a very high support rate there. So all of those backends are their own kind of implementations, if you will. They all share the same API, so it's transparent to the user. You don't have to worry about that. But we're actually maintaining several backends there, so it's a lot of work for our team to maintain. But it allows you to get some really great performance. I think our latest pose estimation model called MoveNet that can recognize your pose can run at over 120 frames per second on an NVIDIA 1070 graphics card, which is actually not even current generation stuff. It's a few years old. So that
Yeah.
shows you how fast things can run in the browser now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I guess. Sorry, Bruno. I just had one last thing to
Sure.
talk about. So I guess. Yeah. Having multiple code bases is generally is considered to be a redundant thing, but I guess in the case of a company at the scale of Google, it actually helps because you get the maximum performance out of wherever you are running the code on, I guess.
Yeah, so as I said, so the API itself is like one API, but it can talk to several different backends. So the way it's been designed is very efficient. We're not replicating the actual API itself necessarily again and again and again, but if you are familiar with machine learning, you'll know that these things called ops or operations. And these are like mathematical functions, if you will. And each one of those mathematical functions needs to be implemented in a different way, depending on the hardware you're executing on. So if you're running on WebGL, you actually need to write it in like WebGL shaders and things like this to do the mathematics as computer graphics. If you're using WebAssembly, then of course you need the same operation written in WebAssembly, and so on and so forth. So yeah, they've done it in the most elegant way possible for the situation, and that allows us to support pretty much every device out there running JavaScript. We can run on mobile phones, we can run on desktops, laptops, even Raspberry Pis we can run on with Node.js. So yeah.
What about the backend? If we don't explicitly mention the backend,
Yes.
So how does TensorFlow understand what backend to use?
So typically, I think we've got a hierarchy of preference. So I think if the device supports WebGL, we can check for that very quickly. We'll try and execute it on WebGL by default, I believe. And then we'll choose WASM, and then we'll choose just regular JS CPU. And if you want to override that, there's a command you can use called tf.setBackend, and you can force WebGL or WASM or whatever it is that you want. So yeah, we've got a default hierarchy in that case.
Got it. That's it, Akash.
Yeah. Sorry, if you guys could explain what MobileNet was.
Oh yeah, yes. So MobileNet essentially is one of the machine learning models out there for computer vision that allow you to recognize objects in an image, essentially. So if there's a cat in the image, it can tell me I'm 90% confident there's a cat somewhere in the image. It won't tell you where it is in the image. There's other models that can do that, like Coco SSD, that allow you to do bounding box detection as well. But yeah, MobileNet often powers a lot of these other models for computer vision. Yeah.
I see. All right. I guess we can start taking audience questions now. I have a few questions in my DM, but I think since you guys have been listening in from the start, I think it's fair to let you guys ask questions first. You can either request to speak over here or DM me or Pranav with any questions that you might have. Anyone of you can hit the request to speak button there to ask a question live.
It took me a moment to find the button as well. It's all good. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the questions that I had, one of them was how you became a developer advocate at Google. I think we covered that part already.
But if there's anything else they wanted to know, feel free to clarify. If there's something that I missed in my description that you wanted to know, I can clarify that.
Yeah, and what kind of problems do dev advocates solve day to day?
Yeah. So I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit there. A typical day in the life of Jason here is, I'll wake up and I'll probably have many LinkedIn requests of people wanting to get answers to their TensorFlow.JS questions for some more technical things, maybe. I'll often be found on social media checking our various hashtags. So we've got the Made with TFJS hashtag that I started so that the community can rally around that to share their projects that they create. I'll be often filming new videos for our show and tells and presentations that we give around the world. So I've got all the recording studio set up in my bedroom here right now. And you'll often find me shooting videos for new content on that show. I'll be creating new prototypes that we can share at events or to the community. I'll be working with the software engineering team actually at Google to listen in on their meetings to see what they're planning for the future. And typically I can also influence that to some degree as well, based on my knowledge of how the community need things to go and what direction that should be taking. So I can weigh in there and say, okay, I think this API design should be slightly different because of X, Y, and Z. And I can kind of explain that to them, and they can get feedback from me on those kinds of things. You'll find me in a TensorFlow forum as well, answering questions there. Sometimes I'm writing courses for people like edX and that kind of stuff, making code labs. Like, there's so many things that you can be doing as a developer advocate. There's basically, you're getting involved in as many things as possible with the product and ensuring that they're working in the best way possible for people to consume and to learn from, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I was going to contribute in TensorFlow.JS. I had tried a lot. Like I had also asked Karthike,
Yeah.
he's also involved in that, but didn't got any kickstart for that. Any tips from your side?
Yes, if you want to contribute to TensorFlow.js, I believe on our GitHub we have a contributing.md file which you can use as a starting point to kind of see how to do some of the common things there. If you want to get involved in our special interest group, which is our SIG for TensorFlow.js, we've got various things going on in those groups to improve TensorFlow.js and working on adding new features and enhancements to the core library by collaborating with our community. That group meets every month, I believe. And if you want more details on that, I can also send that to you after the show here on LinkedIn or something if you would like to hear more about that.
Sure, I would be DMing you. Thank you.
Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah, so if anyone else has any questions, they can request to speak again. But meanwhile, one of the questions which was DM'd to me was, so Jason, what have your learnings been in your career or even outside of work for however long you've worked so far, I guess?
My
I mean, it's a
learnings
very,
in what context exactly? Just like things I've learned along the way.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
They've mentioned technical and career-wise.
I
So
see. Yeah.
not sure what they meant, but
Yeah. So I think one thing that I did in my career that I found very useful is if you look at the types of jobs that I've held over the past 15 years or so, you'll notice that I started off in a very narrow job. I just did like web engineering, for example. And then I went to something which allowed me to go wider by trying other things out. And then I went narrow again, and then I went wider again with things like the creative engineering role. And then I've gone narrow again now with machine learning, looking after TensorFlow.js. So I think that combination of focusing to, obviously go deep is important so you can become an expert in something, but you also need those moments in life every, 5 years or so to go wide so that you can actually see what is out there. Otherwise, you might climb one tree in the forest, but then you got to see the forest to see what other trees there are to climb every once in a while as well. So don't forget to do that as technology changes very quickly. And, it's good to do that from time to time in case you want to pivot your career in a slightly different direction or merge two fields together or something like that. So that's one piece of advice I'd give there. The second learning is that if you don't like your job, then change it. And it's very scary to do that sometimes. But if you are doing something that you don't like, then try and figure out how you can start to move in a direction that makes you more happy, and try and follow that path. So a good example of this is, let's say you're a software engineer and you're actually finding software engineering a little bit boring for some reason. You're like, okay, I've done this so much now. I want to do something slightly different. And maybe you're really passionate about music, let's say. So in that situation, you've got some good skills as a software engineer, but maybe you can combine them with the music industry to do something in that space and join a startup that's trying to do something in that space. And that will allow you to kind of progress in something you enjoy as well. And I see a lot of people get stuck on in their careers where they're doing jobs just for the money or some other reason. And, they're not progressing as a human being for the passions that they have. And it's important to follow those things too, even though it's sometimes scary. Like me, when I quit the investment bank after one day, I didn't have any backup plan. I had lots of student debt. I had to pay that off still somehow. And I didn't know what was going to happen after that. But, I think sometimes you have to take these calculated risks, especially when you're younger, and pivot fast. So fail fast and move on is a good kind of piece of advice there as well. Don't be afraid to do so.
So one question I think which would be helpful from what you just talked about,
Yeah.
have you had any major pivots in your career after spending 2 or 3 years at a company? Like you were working on one technology, then you became a senior developer on that, but then you pivoted to a completely different technology after a while.
Right. So, I mean, I guess web engineering for me has been my theme, my core theme throughout my career. But like for me, like machine learning was not something that I was an expert in. I'm still not an expert as far as I'm concerned. There's still lots to be learnt in the world of machine learning. It's a very fast moving industry. So for me, that's a pivot in my current career. And in the future, maybe I want to go back to more of a hardware kind of thing where I can design like something with robotics and drones or something like that. Who knows where I'll go in the next 10 years? But I'm sure at some point I might pivot again once I feel confident to kind of do so. And everyone's kind of interests change over the course of their lives as well. So what I say today might not be true in 10 years time, but I think follow what you want to do and try and find opportunities to allow you to do that. And maybe that's in your 20% time. If you're able to do that kind of stuff at your company to explore those areas within your company, that's also a great way to do that. You don't always have to leave the company if your company offers those kinds of opportunities. So often you can even try different roles out to do that kind of stuff.
All right. Pawan, are you there right now?
Yeah.
Yes. What question did you have?
So, as someone just starting with machine learning or is just interested, right? What will be the best resources and communities to join?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, obviously, as I represent TensorFlow.JS, I only really know the links that I can give you for that one. But if you're very new to machine learning, I recommend just trying out some no-code approaches to begin with, just to get a feel for the limitations and what it can do well, what it can't do so well. And we've got a great example for that called Teachable Machine. If you Google that phrase, you'll find our website, teachablemachine.withgoogle.com. And on there, you can actually use TensorFlow.js in the browser without writing a single line of code to recognize an object, to recognize your pose, or to recognize a sound. And this is a really nice way to kind of find out why there are problems with certain machine learning models and what bias is when we're talking about machine learning models. So if you use that tool and you try and recognize, say, a water bottle that you might have in your hand, you might notice that it learns pretty fast what the water bottle is, but then if you put your hand there, it also scores it as a water bottle. And what it actually recognized was your hand holding the water bottle, not the water bottle that you're trying to show it. So you can find out and do this in a playful way to kind of just get a feel for what can go wrong when using machine learning as well. And that will actually give you a better inherent understanding of how things are working at a high level before you start unraveling the onion and going deeper. And also, that also gives you a chance to explore the different fields of machine learning. There's like natural language processing for understanding human language. There's computer vision kind of based models to obviously recognize things from images. There's stuff that you can do with audio. There's generative models for creative kind of machine learning as well. So you can play with all of these to start with and see which one you want to go deeper in. And then you can start progressively going deeper in the field that makes you most interested.
Got it.
Yeah. And if you want to see some inspiration, you can also check out our show and tell on YouTube. You can actually put in TensorFlow.js show and tell on YouTube, and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff made by people just like you. Some are completely new to machine learning and JavaScript, but they've managed to make some really cool things like yoga pose estimators for fitness and health and all this kind of stuff. And it was their first project they ever created, but it works really, really well. So it's a great way to get inspiration by looking at other people's projects as well. And we've got example code to get started on glitch.com and also codepen.io. If you search TensorFlow.js on there, you'll find our very easy to fork code to get started to do some really cool things.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problems.
That answers my questions so well.
Awesome. And yeah, if you make something, do use the hashtag #MadeWithTFJS on Twitter or LinkedIn. And that way, if it's pretty cool, you might be in our future show. So I look forward to seeing what you create.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Pawan. Lalit, you're also a speaker. Please go ahead.
So first of all, thanks Akash for the mic access. And hello, Jason. So I wanted to seek a general career advice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that software engineering isn't the only thing to do after graduating college, but for someone who wants a career in ML, So like I have heard that most of the recruiters only consider people with a PhDs, and like they at least require an MS or like even entering the ML domain. And like I too have seen many people going into the ML after like they do some years of experience in a software development job, or like after they go it in after doing an MS. So like I wanted to ask in today's age, like what are the different ways a graduate can directly go into ML, and like what can I do now to get started? So like to give a background, like I'm currently in college in my second year, and
Sure.
like I have developed some projects in Python, C, and like I am learning data analysis with Python.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually hear this a lot from people who are like in the process of graduating and trying to find their path at the early stages of a career. And I think the best thing you can do here is to build your personal brand. So at Google, you don't actually need a degree to work at Google, and it's more about your ability to do the thing well to the same level as someone who might have a degree in, say, computer science or something like this. So obviously, when you're applying to large companies like Google, it can be very competitive because you can be competing with people with PhDs and masters and all this kind of stuff. But if you can prove through your work and your contributions to the community that you're already working at that level, then you don't have to have that stuff to do it. I do not have a PhD, and I'm working in machine learning, and you don't need a PhD to do stuff in machine learning, and you can always start off in a role maybe like mine, and then if you want to go into the research side of things more deeply, you can then progressively move towards those kinds of teams once you've joined the company it is that you're wanting to join. And also, using machine learning skills in startups is a growing need right now as well. And you'll find that, startups probably won't need you to have a PhD either in order to do this. They'll be happy to find someone who just understands that domain even. So I think there'll be a lot of options there. The harder part when you're early on in your career is this chicken and egg situation of experience versus jobs wanting experience. And obviously when you're younger, that you might not have as much experience when you're younger on. So in that situation, the best thing you can do there is build your portfolio online in terms of your LinkedIn presence, your contributions on GitHub to open source projects, creating interesting things, writing them up in blog posts, contribute articles to magazines, that kind of stuff. And when you then apply to a job for real, you'll have all this stuff you can reference, which I guarantee most people won't even have bothered to do. They kind of miss that bit a lot of the time. So that will allow you to stand out a little bit extra from others at that point.
So to end on a positive note, I have a interesting question for you.
Yep.
So what's the one thing which has been the most exciting for you, which you've been learning about or working on for the past 2 weeks?
The past 2 weeks, oh my gosh. Okay, what have I been up to? So I guess the thing that I'm most proud of in the last 2 weeks is that I'm creating a new course on edX. I think it'll be the first TensorFlow.JS course on there. So I'm currently in the process of recording the videos for this one and writing up all the nice content. And for people who are looking to get started in machine learning, this hopefully will be a very nice go-to course for TensorFlow.JS that will walk you from kind of zero to hero and covering many different areas at least. So hopefully that will be out in the not too distant future. So stay tuned for that. And that's kind of been the exciting thing there. And also the show and tell went live on October the 1st on YouTube. So that was just just after 2 weeks, I guess. But that was the other big thing that happened recently. And I checked that out on YouTube if you're interested to see 6 new amazing demos from the community, which included self-driving cars and even the ability to do motion capture live in the browser to control avatars and VTubers and all this kind of stuff too. So those videos are now live on YouTube for you to watch in your coffee break if you're interested.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It's always fun to look at those show and tell videos while we are on a break or doing something else. Yeah. And edX couldn't have chosen a better person to give a tutorial about TensorFlow.js than the developer advocate for TensorFlow.js itself, of course. So thanks, Jason, for joining us so late and giving an interesting talk.
Thank you for joining.
And thanks, Pranav.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions afterwards, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter and stuff. So feel free to follow. if you're interested in any of these areas, and I can always just tweet at me or something and I can reply. So have a good day.
Yep.
Have a good
Have a
day.
good day.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.